All right, my name is Rich Schmidt. I'm here at Furioso Vineyards with Dominique Mahe. It's June 1st, 2020. Thank you so much for joining us today, Dom. We appreciate this. First question, most important question, why wine?
Well, thank you for being here, Rich. Well, there are many reasons, actually. And it has been a very long and winding road for me to get from where I was to here and now. I was not born in a wine family. I do not come from a rich family either. My mom was a farmer's daughter, and my dad was working class, and some people might even say that he might qualify sometimes as a redneck. They lived in a trailer for many years, while my siblings were born, and pretty much until I was born. So when they eventually were able to find a place to settle down, a little property with a little bit of land, the first thing my dad did was actually to build a wine cellar under the workshop. And that was even before they built the house, you see. What you have to understand is that in the States, the word wine cellars and rednecks are rarely used in the same sentence. But in France, in the 70s, wine was pretty much the Bud Light of the working class. So my dad's wines was cheap, okay? We will get it from a wine growler station up the street. So we will walk there with these empty bottles, and they will have those bulk wine into those 200, 300 gallon tanks. No vintage, no appellations. And they will fill my dad's empty bottles, and that will cost him maybe less than €1 per bottle. And that would be my dad's everyday wine. And now for special occasion, like at New Year's Eve dinner or Christmas dinner, my dad will go to the store to pick up either a nice fancy champagne or a good Bordeaux or a Côte du Rhône. And when I say the store, I don't mean the wine store. He will go to Leclerc or Unico, which is the equivalent of Safeway and Albertson. So this was wine for me growing up. Wine was no more than a commodity. And again, more related to being working class than being part of an elite. As teenager here in the States, people view alcohol as this kind of hyped, forbidden pleasure that you can't even look at until you are like of legal age. But in France, teenagers look at alcohol or wine as more like a very blasé about this. And it's part of the French culture, I guess. Myself, I don't even remember when was the first time I drank wine or alcohol. It might have been when I was 10 years old, and my dad just put a splash of wine in my glass with lots of water for dinner. It could have been after working in the garden in a hot summer day with my mom, where she gave me a panaché, which is a blend of beer and lemonade. So, obviously not much alcohol there. But bottom line is that really, I don't remember at all when I first actually tasted alcohol in my life. It's such a big deal thing that, your parents don't see it as a big deal thing, and so therefore you don't see it as a big deal thing either. So in my late teen, I went to college, and since science was my forte and my interest, I trained as an engineer. After my graduation, I took my first trip abroad, and I went to Canada, and I backpacked and hitchhiked on my way through Quebec. And that was an amazing experience, very much of an eye-opener for me, and maybe in a way my first step to the wine journey, because I realized then that I love traveling, experiencing different culture, meeting other people, and also the fact that you have to put your whole life in one bag. And that's where you realize you don't need much to actually be happy. So that first kind of aha moment for me led me to take a job in the oil industry. And I was actually working on drilling rigs kind of all over the world. And so there was two reasons for me to take that job. Well, number one, this is an industry where you work really hard every day for 4, 5, 6 weeks in a row. And then you get 4, 5, 6 weeks off. So basically you are 6 months a year on vacation and get more time to do more traveling. So that was a perfect setup for me. Money was okay, especially when you don't have to pay a rent or you don't have to pay a mortgage because you're crashing at your friend's place or squatting your parents' place, and or you're traveling more. So it was good. I worked for many years, for 5 years in West Africa and North Africa. I had some interesting job in this industry. I remember my last one was working in Libya. It was Gaddafi was still in power, and we were actually working in the desert for an Italian company, Agip, and I had this guy working with me. He was English, but he was very much into kite. And he was building his own stunt kite, and sometimes we will go in the desert and fly his kites. But when there was no wind, then one of us will get behind the wheel of the pickup truck, and the other one will be at the back, and we'll be driving like 30, 40 miles an hour, flying those kites in the desert, and we will cross, like an army patrol there, and we'll obviously say, those people are crazy. But anyway, those are good memories, and I really enjoyed my time working in the oil industry. I thought, it was definitely going to places you will not go there as a tourist, for sure. But as I was traveling also for leisure, I went to visit a friend in Japan, and he lived in Tokyo at the time, and we got together. He had some friends. I met a girl there. She was from Australia. So long story short, in 1995, I moved to Australia. And didn't know what I was going to do. I went back to school. I studied another engineering degree in Sydney, where we were living. And this friend who was in Tokyo had moved to Brisbane, which is kind of north of Sydney. So one long weekend we went to visit them, and he said, "Hey, do you want to go wine tasting today?" I said, "Oh, okay, sure, why not?" Sounds like fun. So there is a wine region there close to Brisbane called the Granite Belt, and so we just took the car and we drove around and tasted some wine and talking to some winemakers, and that was a fun day. And at one stage, we stopped to this winery, and the guy who actually was a winemaker was originally from Italy, and so he had these wineries there in Brisbane or in the Granite Belt, and he was making, his wines there. But his family also had a winery back in Italy, where he was from. So he would actually, in the dead season for the wine industry in Australia, he will actually fly back to Italy and help his parents making wines there. And I thought, that sounds like a good life. I could see myself doing something like this, 6 months in Australia, 6 months in France. Yeah, that sounds like something I wanted to do. So, but obviously, how do I get into wine? I was so naive at the time that I didn't even realize you can go to school to study. I mean, my assumption growing up is that, people who are into the wine industry, people who are making wine in France, it's because their parents have a winery, and basically those things are passed on from generation to generation. And that's the way it was. And I never actually questioned myself about, okay, well, how do people get into this industry? So when I was there, I found out, when I was in Australia, I did a bit of research, found out there were actually 2 universities in Australia at the time. Was back in '95, which actually was offering a wine program. One was Wordsworthy in Adelaide in South Australia, and the other one was in Walla Walla, which is in New South Wales, so in the same states, and Sydney, kind of about 4 or 5 hour drive from Sydney. And I thought, well, maybe I could go and join this one. And so I applied, but I was told right away, well, listen, we can't take any applicant because we're only actually letting people who are already in the industry to actually get into this program. We have limited space, so you have to be already working in this industry to be able to apply for this course. I say, damn it. So by that time it was the end of 1995, and I wanted to really get into this program by early '96. So north of Sydney, there is a wine region called the Hunter Valley. I mean, it's probably not the best wine because it's kind of very hot and humid. So, but still, it's popular because it's close to Sydney. It's a very touristy area, so that's why it's there probably. I drove there one day. I took the car, drove there one day, and I went from one winery to the next. And I said, hey, I want to speak to somebody in charge, a winemaker, and I said, hey. I don't know anything about wine. I just, really want to get into it. I want to get into this university, Charleston. I need a letter of recommendations. I will work. I know Harvest is coming because Harvest over there will start like January of the year. I said I will come and work for free for 2 weeks. You don't have to pay me. And all I need from you is that you give me a letter of recommendation so I can actually apply to that school. And eventually, this guy over there at Mount Pleasant Winery just think about it and said, okay, you're on. You start mid-January. All right. So I got ready, and mid-January comes. I get there not knowing what to expect. And started to work in the cellar as a cellarette, as you do when you start in this business. And right away, it fits me. I mean, it's exactly my kind of work. And funny enough, after having worked in the oil industry for a few years, what we're doing in a winery is not that different. There are pumps, you move things around, and actually I was feeling very comfortable with the work and really enjoying it too. After 2 weeks, the winemaker came to find me, and he said, his name was Scott, and Scott says, we're going to pay you for the 2 weeks, and I'm going to get you the letter as well, but also we want you to stay for the whole harvest. So that was perfect. I ended up staying there, working the whole harvest that year in '95, in '96, getting my letter to get to university, which I started pretty much at the same semester. And that's how I actually got really my first foot into working in a winery. And I simply loved it. It was really a good experience for me. And the people you meet and the culture behind it, definitely people who are into wine are into food. And that also was a great part of the perks of being into this industry. And I got to travel, which is kind of ultimately the goal. I ended up, so Scott, actually, the long story is that Scott had worked in France for Harvest when he was doing his own apprenticeship, when he was a student, or after his graduation anyway. He went to work in an area in the Beaujolais, so south of Burgundy, and he got there not speaking a word of French, which I knew he didn't speak French, but I would always assume that the guy back in Burgundy, the Beaujolais, the guy he worked with, spoke some English. And it happens that through Scott, I also ended up working in that same winery in the Beaujolais. And when I met Alex, then the guy, I realized he didn't speak a word of English. And so for those harvests that those two spent together, none of them could communicate, and they were all doing by sign language and little drawings. But I thought it was so amazing that people, because of the same set of mind, are able to communicate and do the job that way. So yeah, I worked over there in the Beaujolais, and I have to say the Beaujolais was probably one of my best experience working in this industry. The way it works over there, they have Beaujolais, if you know, it's all cluster picked. So you can't go with machine. It has to be harvested by hand 100%. And what they do, they actually, at the time anyway, I think things probably have changed now, but at the time they were providing accommodation to all the pickers. So not only you get food, you get also lodging. So they have those old castle, usually those old buildings, farm buildings, and they will jam in there like 40, 50 peoples in this big dormitory, and it will be constant partying. Young people from all over the country, from all over Europe actually, and it will be a constant partying time, and there was never a dull moment, I can tell you that. I mean, even in the winery, you start work early, and then by 9 o'clock in the morning you have the casse-croûte, which is basically the first break, and of course it's bread, cheese, charcuterie, and wine. This is it. 9 o'clock, you're already drinking your first glass of wine, and then you go for lunch, more wine, and of course you go for dinner, and guess what? More wine, and the party starts. And usually, kind of being the oldest of some of those people, we will end up going to nightclub, and I was the one driving them, so we will drive to those nightclubs, not come back till probably 3 in the morning, and by 6 o'clock you'll be up again. And you do it for a month, and you do it because you have such an adrenaline, it's such like a constant go, 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 go that you don't have time to be tired. That's what it comes down to. So it was really, I never laughed so much working harvest in the Beaujolais. I have to say that was amazing. One year I did 2 harvests there with Alex there, and 1 year there was a guy from New Zealand. This guy was a monster. He could have been in the All Blacks. He was huge, tall, and hard worker, and it was a good experience. He actually one day was putting the pomace of a tank with somebody else, and they had this pitchfork, and the guy with the pitchfork suddenly hears a New Zealander guy say, "Hi." Say, "Are you okay? What happened?" Say, "Oh, I'm fine." And they keep going. And actually it happened that the guy put a pitchfork through his nail and pulled the guy's nail. Oh. And the guy kept on working like nothing happened. But anyway, there's tons of memory from harvest in the Beaujolais. And I think, again, that was definitely the reason I thought, yeah, this is definitely the industry. This is what I want to be doing for the rest of my life. So, back to my study. I was studying. I was picking up harvest as it goes, and in '99 I did like 4 harvests last year. I was basically starting in the Hunter Valley, where that winery I worked for originally, had wanted me to come back. I worked another harvest in Coonawarra, which is kind of in South Australia, slightly cooler, so it's a little bit later. Mm-hmm. So I was there for April, May that year, and then took a bit of a break, and then went to Beaujolais for September. And I had lined up, after Beaujolais, I had lined up another harvest in the States, in Idaho. And the reason why I came there to Idaho or to the States is that, visa-wise, I know there is a cutoff for those G1 visas they were offering. You have to be, younger than 35. And I thought, if I want to go at least experience one harvest in the States, I should probably do it now. So, so I ended up going in Idaho. It was October '99. And a winery which you might have heard of because it's Sainte-Chapelle, and if you go to Safeway, you see lots of Riesling for Sainte-Chapelle. This is what they do there, a lot of Riesling. So I worked there for harvest as an intern. And the guy I work for, Stephen Roberto, the winemaker, kind of got to like me. I guess he liked what I was bringing to the winery and to the wine. And so when harvest was over, he said, "Hey, listen, if you want to stay, I could have a position for you as a cellar master." And I thought about it for a sec. And say, "You know what? I think I had a good time here, and also I really like this area there. It's close to Boise, but you have also the mountains are not very far off, and so it's a beautiful kind of area to be. And the people I met actually were very nice, and I really like the experience. So I said, sure." So he got me a visa, and I got to work, and was working at Saint-Chapelle pretty much for a couple of years. Then it was taken over by this big wine corporation called Canandaigua, which is one of the biggest world company, wine world company anyway. And things changed a bit, so I decided back in 2001, you know what, I'm going to go back to Australia. I think, I've experienced it, that was good. I'm going to go back to Australia. So went back to Australia, worked harvest there, where people, wanted me back, so that was great. And a year later, I was like, I'm really missing the Northwest. I really, thought I had a great time here, and I love the beauty of this area. I want to go back to the Northwest just one more time. And it was in 2002, and I was able to line up a harvest, not in Idaho this time, but I went to Oregon. I actually went to work at Rex Hill. At the time, the winemaker was Aaron Hess, and we were just taking over from Lynn Penarash, the winemaking programs there at Rex Hill. So Aaron gave me a chance working in the lab there for Rex Hill. And pretty much the same thing happened. I do harvest there, and Aaron, by the end of harvest, come and talk to me and say, "Listen, if you wanna stay, I could get you a full-time position here." And I said, "Sure." Actually, it was a full-time, but it was a half-time full-time, which means that he will need me 6 months a year. And so, for a few years, I was doing 6 months at Rex Hill, and I was doing 6 months in Australia. And that was kind of a good life too. I will every year I will buy my One the World ticket from Australia, and I will do Melbourne, Portland, Paris, Phuket. I had a friend in Phuket in Thailand, and then back to Melbourne. That will be kind of my life for a couple of years, just like traveling and working. And I think it was a very good life. Eventually, things opened up even more for me at Rex Hill, as they wanted me to stay full time. So I ended up staying there 12 months a year, and 2005 came. I had met a friend who was friend with Thibaut Mandé at Willa Kenzie. And I'm guessing that friend I was working with must have said some interesting thing to Thibaut, because one day I got a call from Thibaut and they said, "Hey, are you interested to move on to do something else?" And I said, "Let's talk." And so Thibaut and Bernard Lacroute at Willa Kenzie offered me a position there at Willa Kenzie, which is one of the most beautiful and best designed winery here in the valley, I think. So I went to work at Willa Kenzie in 2005. Had fantastic times there, make beautiful wines for sure, and stayed there for nearly 10 years. I did, though, take a little escapade. During those 10 years, I left for about 18 months and actually went to work in Burgundy, just at another winery there in Gevrey-Chambertin. And so, because I never really worked in Burgundy, I worked in the Beaujolais, but I never really worked in Burgundy, and I thought that would be an interesting thing to do. So I worked there for 18 months before coming back to Willa Kenzie. And in 2015, again I was contacted this time by Gerard Edsel, who's running Domaine Roy next door from here. Gerard was working with one of his clients, Giorgio Furioso, who was starting this new project here. And he needed somebody kind of to run the everyday winemaking and kind of kickstart the project, really. Because before this building, there was really not much on this property. We had those old vines. We know one of the oldest here on Warden Hill Road. But pretty much, everything had to be done. And So I said yes, and this is where I've been since 2015. So in a nutshell, that's kind of the story of my wine journey. But just to answer your question, which is why? Why? Because I think, you get to live in a beautiful place. Being in Oregon, this is probably one of the best places in the world. I mean, I've traveled a lot, so I can talk, in expertise. I think also because the culture of wine is such a really cool thing, because it's always linked to food and friends and family, and so always something positive. And there's something kind of unique, I think, about making wine, where you start with something as raw as vines you put in the dirt, and you end up with a product that you make yourself. You turn those vines that make grapes into wine that you're gonna bottle and label and package, and eventually you go from that product, that was grapes, you go to that bottle of wine that you're gonna give to your customers, that you're gonna hand out to your customer. So I don't think there is no other industry. Basically, you start with something as simple as basic to end up into this more elevated product that you basically give to the final consumers. Mm-hmm. And I think that's something very unique about this. And to me, making wine is a fun process. I like it because it fits my personality. I think most winemakers, as you probably know, are picky people, and I kind of like details. Mm-hmm. I like simplicity, but I like details. Things have to be done right every time. There is no chance. You can't make a mistake when you make wine, and that's pretty much what people don't understand sometimes, is that 80% is good enough. Well, 80% is not good enough. You have one chance, you have one vintage, you have so many tons of grape to work on. You cannot replace that. Mm-hmm. So you have to make sure that you don't screw it up. Mm-hmm. And that's really the key about being a good winemaker, I think, is to really make sure that everything you do is the right thing. It's a simple job. Honestly, making wine is as simple as it gets, really. But you have to make sure that every step is done correctly all the time. And that's why it's so demanding, and you have to be really meticulous about how you do things. Mm-hmm. So yeah, I think that's the reason why, why wine. That's the reason, for those three main reasons, I would say. The locations, the job itself, and basically what it represents. Wine is always, something fun.
I'm curious about all the travels, all the different places you've worked, and kind of a lot of sort of short stints here and there. I'm curious about sort of how you developed your winemaking philosophy. I mean, you started as a cellar rat, and then you were taking formal education, working all the way up into being a winemaker in Oregon. How did you sort of develop that kind of like meticulous, simple, doing it right every time? How did you get to that point? And at what point did you feel comfortable saying, I'm the one who can make decisions, I'm the one who can do this process correctly?
Well, I think it comes with experience. I think I'm surprised that people who just finish graduation, who just finish school, can jump into a winemaking job. I think to be able to do winemaking, you have to really understand the process and do it for a long time. Look at the sushi cook, for instance. How many years do you spend just learning how to cook rice? I think it's kind of the same idea. It sounds crazy, but experience is really important. And I think, again, you have to have the right personality. I think, you have to. Not everybody can work in a winery, and I won't be good working in a tasting room. Everybody has their own strengths, and to me, it has also to do with what you are, who you are as a person.
So, at what point? What did you take away from the various places you've worked? Were there certain moments that you can mark as terms of like, I understand this now, or this is how I want to grow grapes, or this is how I want to make wine? Were there certain people who had influence on you along the way?
Oh yeah, I mean, definitely people who've given me a chance, like Stephen Roberto in Idaho, Aaron Hess here in Oregon. I owe a lot to those people because I won't be there today. I think, working in bigger wineries like I did in Australia, where they have way more technology, it's interesting, as an engineer. It's kind of it's interesting, but I think it takes away the soul of the wine. I come to believe that, and many other winemakers, which is the same, that really what's important is the quality of the grapes you can go. I mean, that's where you have to start with. You have to have pristine grapes to make the best wine, or the one which will be the most in connection to the soil, to the place here. I think Oregon is very lucky because we have kind of the best condition to grow grapes. We have perfect dry summer most of the time. You do have, those cooler, cold winter where the vines can really get dormant and take a rest. And you get lots of water too in spring, which is going to make sure there's going to be always lots of water in the soil for the vines to be able to go through that hot summers we have here. I think also where we are located, 45 degrees north, we get those very long days in fall, and we have those cooler nights still. So keeping acidity, slow ripening season. I think we have really, weather-wise, some of the best conditions to grow grapes here in Oregon. The soil obviously is important, and both Willackenzie soil and Joey soil are good drainage soil, which is also important for growing grapes. I do remember, back my first vintage here in Oregon was 2002 at Rex Hill, and I remember clearly it was back in October, and the weather was just like today. It was just like blue sky, dry, and nights were cold. And I thought, my God, this place is just like Pinot Noir heaven. I mean, this is what you want. This is exactly the perfect place that you should have. And so yeah, I think that's the reason why I wanted to be here too, to have to be able to work with those kind of fruit. As I said, I worked in Burgundy, did 2 harvests there, and plus the one in the Beaujolais, but I think what people don't realize in Burgundy is the summer is plagued with thunderstorm. I was blown away by, how bad the weather can be there in summer. I mean, here in Oregon, in 15 Sawyer, 2002, what does it make it? I don't even know. 18
Thank
you for reminding me. Thanks, Rich. So in 18 years, I think I must have seen like hail like 3 times in summertime, and I'm talking, all the size of my nail here. It's just, and it lasts for 5 minutes, and that's it. Burgundy sees some of the worst hail I can think of. Those things are the size of a golf ball, and it's very windy usually, so it goes through the canopy, it destroys all the leaves, it destroys all the fruit, but also it takes away all the wood, it can cut the wires. I mean, really every year you have a producer in Burgundy who is going to lose his old vineyard, not the vintage, he loses the old vineyard because of hail. And so to me that's not a good place to grow grapes. And but they have other thing going for them. Don't get me wrong. I think they have an amazing story to tell. I mean, 1,000 years of making wine. I mean, we're never going to beat that. Back to the monk, and I mean, you can't beat that for sure. And they have old vines. I mean, the average age of vines there in Burgundy is probably 70 years old. That's the average. Okay, so maybe come back in 50 years and we can talk about what we can do here in Oregon, because I think by that time we also had some very old vines, which again are kind of the key to make some really exciting and complex Pinot Noir. When you see those, where I worked for in Gevrey-Chambertin, we had some 90 years old vines, and they produce maybe 5 or 6 clusters per vine, but berries are so small, so concentrated. You can see, yes, you're going to make an amazing wine with this. But again, if the weather let you. And that's definitely something that is so rare, I think, in Burgundy compared to what we have here in Oregon. The other thing I like also about the New World is a sort of freedom to do what we want to do. And again, if you go back to places like Burgundy or Europe, the appellations made it so hard because they have all those rules that they have to follow. And I feel sorry for them, but at the same time, you have to remember why those rules were put in place in the first place. It's because back in the 70s, Burgundy wines, or those anyway, Ypres wine region of France, were so popular that they couldn't keep up with the demand. And what they were doing, they were really trying to push the vines as much as they could. They were going from 3, 4, 5 tons to an acre, and you hear stories about wine being brought up at night from another cheaper wine region to be blended with those Premier Cru and Grand Cru, just because they wanted to get the volume, and they will do the harvest, and then they will go back a few weeks later and get a second crop, those second crop that grows on the end of the shoots, and they will harvest that too and make some wine. So the quality of the wine really plummeted at the time, and that's the reason why somebody said, okay, that's enough, we need to keep sure it stays the quality stays there. So they put in place those very strict rules about the yield, date where you could start to harvest, how much you can add in the juice, and type of sugar and acid. It was very, very highly regulated. But now it's turning out that even if you want to do a good job in Burgundy, it's hard because you have to follow the rules. And I've experienced this firsthand where you're really just working at a fine line here, okay, trying to stay legal and trying to also make what you want to do. Here in Oregon, we are lucky that we can do whatever we want. We can plant whatever we want. We can harvest whenever we want. And I think there are enough people here that still want to just make quality wines that we still have fallen into this trap of going for big production and cheap wines.
Tell me about the project here. You mentioned 2015, your approach to start here. There's not really anything here except for vines. So tell me about what the Furioso vision was and what you've done in the 5 years here.
So there was this old vines here, which was called the Juilliard Vineyard from the previous owner, Julie and Gerard Koschel, who used to have Crumble Rock Winery. So there was also a little red barn right there where this building is, where they were making Crumble Rock wine. There was a small production. They were mostly selling the fruit to other winemakers which had recognized the value of this fruit. So the fruit will go to Arterbury Marsh, will go to Winderley, will go to Erath, actually had some fruit. And so for many years, those other winery here did a single vineyard at the Juilliard site. And so when Giorgio bought the place in 2015, we stopped selling fruit to anybody else. We just use the 7 acres of Pinot Noir we have here to make all our wine. So my first vintage in 15, I did about 1,000 cases. So it was pretty small. I had 5 fermenters, 5 2-tonners, kind of a nice little setup. It wasn't this nice building you have here. It was still working the old facility, but did the job, and that's how we started. At the same time that Giorgio bought this facility, bought this vineyard, he also bought 85 acres in Yamhill, right next to Willakenzie, for that matter, actually. And that same year, planted 22 acres. So we have a new site called Trovato, which is in Yamhill, and it's mostly Pinot Noir. 5 acres of Chardonnay as well, and we planted, thanks to Giorgio and his origin, we planted some Tokai Friuliano, which is this varietal which is grown in the northeast of Italy and the Veneto region. Giorgio's background is also very interesting. Giorgio lives in Washington, D.C. now, but his family is from Italy, and they used to make wine, with his family. And he had his parents, grandfather, and uncle who were involved in the project. So he had lots of memories from his childhood, working into the cellar with his grandfather and working in the vineyard. And so he always knew that eventually that's something he wanted to go back into. And he had a very different career. He's in Washington, D.C. He's a developer. He's a big art supporter. All those paintings he has from his private collection. So yeah, that's what he did with his life, like very much into art and architecture. And that was his vision. So the building here was actually his vision. He wanted to have something very unique. He wanted a tasting very open. So obviously you can see, all the way from the Cascades behind you to the rolling hills of Dundee and on the Willamette Valley in between. You can see the whole process, because what happened during harvest is that this area there is a viewing area for the processing. So I got all my sorting lines is over there. And again, what I said earlier, you can't screw up. And then obviously you can see when the barrels are aging through those windows you noticed when you walked in. So the idea is to have this space very open for our guests to kind of really enjoy the whole process, from where you at to making the wine, really. So that's my other thought, sorry. So yeah, that was Giorgio's project to kind of do this building, and we got some fruit from our new vineyard in 2018. So now we are producing wine, estate wine, from this new vineyard as well, which means that over the last 4 or 5 years, we have increased our production. Last vintage I did about 4,000 cases of wine, and when we are really in total full production, we have some young Chardonnay vines right over here, which are on their third leaf now. So we should be getting full production very soon, and therefore at the time we should be making about 4,500 cases, which is the size we want to be. Giorgio doesn't want to go more than that, and I totally up for that, because I think it's important, again, if you're a winemaker, you have to make the wine. You're not only just pushing paper and giving work orders to your staff. You have to be the one who basically is there every day, follow up on the fermentations, and so you have to be really involved in the winemaking process. Otherwise, to me, you're not a winemaker. That's where the goal is.
Tell me about the sort of sustainability focus of Furioso also. I know winemaking and farming here both kind of a sustainable focus. So tell me about the vineyard and how you're taking care of this and the new site.
Yeah, so both are taking into an organic approach to it. We haven't got certification yet. We've been pushed back a couple of years ago because we had a major issue with voles here on the property, unfortunately. So that pushed back our certification because of that. In the vineyard in Yam Hill, obviously we only started to be organic about 2 years ago. So we're in the process. We're doing the practices now, but we don't have any certification at this stage. Yeah.
What would you say after you've made a lot of wine now in your career and made a lot of wine here and elsewhere? What would you want someone to take away from a bottle of wine that you've made? What is the takeaway from on the consumer side that you would prefer?
Well, I definitely would like them to experience the place. Okay, I want them to when they drink our wine, that they can feel that, okay, they are in Oregon, that they are in the Dundee Hills, and hopefully that they are here on this Furioso Vineyards. My philosophy for winemaking, by the way, is that pretty light-ended, and I kind of, again, my goal is to be able to have good fruit to work with, and I don't do much extraction, kind of gentle extraction of the grapes. I like acidity in the wines. I mean, to me, wine is about food, and to have a good food wine, you need to have a good acid wines. Mm-hmm. So I usually picked, probably early than most people. I have alcohol around 13.5 for my Pinot Noir. And nice acidity, so maybe they have more aging potential as well. Mm-hmm. Pretty hands-off in terms of new oak. About 25% new oak. Definitely don't want to hide the taste of the grapes. That's definitely not the plan, but bring a bit more texture, a bit more volume to the mouth. That's what the oak should be doing. And therefore, by not masking any other flavor of the grapes, I want to make sure people kind of really taste again this terroir we have here. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Tell me about the similarities and differences in the different wine regions you've worked in. How does Oregon compare to Burgundy, Beaujolais, Australia, even Idaho? What are what's unique about Oregon, and what's kind of the same the places you've been?
Well, I think Burgundy and Oregon are very similar in the size of the winery, and I think in the fact that people sometimes have a small budget to work with, and so you have to get by with what you have sometimes to do things. If you go to New Zealand or Australia, there's definitely way more technology being used. It's more like a process than really an art, I think. Mm-hmm. Which is why I like, this space to me is more interesting. Yeah. Mm-hmm. As you look ahead here for the future for yourself and for Furioso, what do you see as, from where you've come so far, what do you see as you look 5-10 years into the future? Well, we're still a very new brand, so we're still very much under the radar. We're getting some good review from, we had one advocate recently, which was really, really good review of the estate. I think we're going to keep growing our fan base. I mean, we have a big club already. I'm surprised and very happy, I would say, with the number of members we have. I have to say we have a great team here in the tasting room. So I was employee number 1, and then in 2017, when we started to have some wines to be released, we hired Jim Maguire as our tasting room manager and DC manager, and Jim is simply amazing. He has a way with people. I think it's a gift that I will never have, but he can have total stranger working here in the tasting room. By the time they leave, they are Jim's best friends, every single time. He has this way to connect with people, which is fairly unique. I've never seen that before. So I'm so glad that he's on board and he put together a team here in our tasting room. Our goal is to make for guests a more unique experience. As you might have seen, we don't have a bar here. You come, you get greeted by a host, and you taken to a table, and you get this 1-hour experience of our wines. Mm-hmm. And I think that's what we want to develop. We want to kind of make sure people who come here, they're going to get the full treatment. We're not being able to take as many people as we would like to, especially on weekends. But we want to make sure that whoever comes here has the best experience. And I think it shows by the feedback I'm seeing from the reviews on Google, on Yelp, and whatever, that we know people have always kind of like not only nice things to say about the time they spend here. Not only about the wine, but also about the experience in general. Mm-hmm. And I think that's something we want to keep making sure we do right. Okay, that's our goal. And not only coming from me, but also from Giorgio. Giorgio has very clear ideas that, he wants people to come here and experience something fairly unique when they come to Furioso, that they will not experience anywhere else. So that's kind of what we have in mind in the next few years. We don't gonna, as I said, increase production. We're gonna keep on making Pinot Noir and Chardonnay and Tokai Frigliano. As we get more Frigliano being produced, I wouldn't mind doing a little bit of a sweet dessert wine, just like a small barrel, just because it's nice to have again to do a full dinner. You get the full Furioso panel. We already have made some sparkling with great success. We had in 2017 we have a sparkling Brut Rosé. And the second disgorging was back in February, and it's selling really well. Last year in 2019, I did a Blanc de Blanc and a Blanc de Pinot as well, which right now is kind of only and will be there for some time for the secondary. So yeah, kind of diversified a bit the wines we have, but not increasing production will be the goal here as far as production goes.
So obviously we're talking now in the middle of the COVID-19 pandemic. Tasting rooms are just sort of getting back open after being closed for a little while. And the future is a little bit murkier than it was. So I'm curious, this is kind of a two-part question. What have you had to change over the last few months in terms of the operation of the winery, obviously in addition to the tasting room, and what do you see for the future now as we're dealing with this?
Well, we had to change a lot of things. Obviously, our hygiene and sanitary practices have been really tightened. I mean, we clean the restrooms every time a customer is using it. We had to take off all our nice furnitures and ended up with more simple furnitures which are easy to clean. We had to also pretty much cut down the number of tables by half. We had I think 16 or 15 tables normally, and we kind of halve that capacity right now in this room. So it definitely has changed a lot for us, and it's way more demanding on the staff. They have to spend way more time cleaning, way more time cleaning for sure. Even the way we interact with customers, we don't really go and have a pour at every guest on the table. Now we bring a small carafe depending on how many guests there are, and basically we just put the carafe on the table, we just walk away, we talk about the wines, they do their own pouring in their glasses. So it's not easy. It's not easy for sure, especially since the host have to wear a mask. It's not easy to connect with guests when you can't see your face, and that's I think will be the biggest challenge. I think we're losing some of the connections with our guests. So yeah, those are not fun time for sure. I know it's going to last. Nobody can tell. I mean, my own take is that I'm thinking that we might see a resurgence of this pandemic. Come October, November. This is going to be here for a while, probably a year. I mean, probably in the best case a year. There's so many unknowns, with all this, that it's really hard to make any predictions. I mean, lots of people are suffering in the valley. I mean, restaurants, are really suffering the most for sure. I mean, you probably have friends in the restaurant industry too, and it's really heartbreaking that lots of them are basically going to have their closing because you can't operate, especially if you're small restaurants. I mean, the other hand, if you can have all your tables, if you have to work at half capacity, there's no way you're going to be able to make it. So those are definitely challenging times for sure. And I know wineries and tasting are also suffering. My goal is definitely not to try to make too much wine this year. I wanted to maybe sell some of the fruit if I could, but the market already seems to be heading the same way. So everybody has fruit to sell if you're interested. A good year to make your own wine this year, Rich.
Great time to start a business.
Yes. So I don't know what's going to happen a year from now. I mean, there is so many issues, both with this pandemic, with the economy, which I think we only start seeing the effect of 30 million people unemployed and business struggling. That could turn to be pretty bad. And what the demand for wine is going to be there, I don't know. It seems like it doesn't stop people from drinking when there's a crisis. It might actually encourage them to drink, but maybe they're going to drink something different. Maybe they're going to go to cheaper wine. We are in very unknown territory right now, and your guess is as good as mine as far as what's going to happen 6 months from now or a year from now. But we know it's going to be tough.
So prior to the last few months, what were the biggest changes you had seen in the Oregon wine industry since you became a part of it in 2002?
Wow, it's been amazing for sure. I mean, to me now, the Oregon wine industry got to be in like the young adult stage, where you see more and more of those big corporations just coming here, throwing tons of money, taking over, some of the places, or starting brand new project, from California, but also obviously from France as well. You also see people who probably don't have any connection in the wine industry, but people who have lots of money to burn and just want to start a small kind of very high-end project. Very small, but kind of really, really high-end and ready to spend a lot of money on that too. So it's a different culture what it was even like 20 years ago, where it was mom and pop style and really just people who were going with little money just to make ends meet and were really passionate about their trade. Here, I think you can see more people who are coming in because they think they're going to make a quick buck, or because they think that it's a prestige image to have a winery, your own winery with your own name maybe on the label kind of thing. So that's why it's changing. So there's lots of room to grow still. I mean, there's a lot of AVA to be discovered, but I hope we don't lose the diversity we have here in Oregon. I mean, we had so much. What people come here, to Oregon is to experience the wine, but also it's part of a bigger picture where you have the food, which is amazing, by the way, and you have also, a landscape like the one around us. You have this kind of a mix of forest and mountains, and the ocean is close. So there is a lot about Oregon that will attract people to come here. And I want to make sure we don't turn everything into vines. If you look at Burgundy, they basically use every single space they had to put vineyard. And this monoculture, to me, is a little sad. I think to have the best experience for guests, we need to keep this diversity. So that's very important. And I don't know if that's going to be the case. I mean, I can see we're going to see more in the next few years of lots of people coming from California, because it's getting harder and harder to grow grapes over there. I mean, temperatures are getting crazy. The fires are another issue. Water is a big issue, even if you don't need it ready for grapes usually. But there is lots of reason why it's getting harder and harder to grow grapes and make wine in California. And I think that you're going to see those people are going to realize, hey, if I sell my place over there, my 15 millions will buy me like something 3 times nicer here in Oregon. So why not go and do that? And we're probably going to see more and more of that, of influx of Californian money here in Oregon. And I don't know where it's going to go from there. We might see also change in what we're going to grow here, because it's getting a bit odd for Pinot sometimes. And we might have to go higher elevation for sure, but also we might have to go and do some different reds.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it's going to be an interesting time too.
So I can see why the job appeals to you, because there's never any certainty. You get to kind of carve it out as you go.
Yes.
Choose your own adventure.
Well, I don't think there is universally anything you do in life, really. I mean, I think, and that's why it's important to stay flexible. I mean, to stay kind of open-minded. As I was saying earlier in this conversation, I really didn't even think I will end up here in Oregon or in the States. My goal was to come and do a harvest in Idaho and just get the hell out of here. and I happened to fall in love with it. I happened to fall in love with the place. So. And so you have to be flexible. You have to kind of say, okay, well, if there is a better opportunity somewhere, if something actually makes way more sense in your life, you should kind of like, follow that, and not just, set your goal and just kind of go, okay, I'm going to forget about anything else, because you realize that probably wasn't the first thing you wanted to do. So, yeah.
Tell me about the wines themselves and the farming practices in Oregon and how they've changed in 18 years. How does the wine quality compare? How does the grape quality compare and the practices compare to when you started?
Well, I think people had to face many challenges over the last 20 years. Obviously, when they started here, the weather was much cooler, so they had to face more disease pressure. They have to, face, wine which sometimes sound a little bit like flimsy and kind of missing a bit of body. And so as time went by, we ended up having like some really hot vintages that required different techniques in the vineyard in terms of what you do, and you pull off leaves, for instance, to not too much, because you want to still protect the grapes and from the sun, yield. So people had to adapt really fast over the last 20 years into going from a true cool climate, to really a warmer climate. And I think it's been interesting because you had all sorts of people who were new in this industry and didn't have experience with any of this, so they had to kind of learn as they went, really. But I think by now we have way more experienced people here in Oregon. We have experienced pretty much every vintage that you can experience, so I think we are lucky that people know what to do in any situation.
What are you proudest of from your time in the wine industry?
Honestly, this project, I was so blessed that Giorgio Furioso decided to hire me to kind of kickstart it. And to me, it was a big challenge because, okay, I've done production, I've done a little bit of cellar clubs, tasting room on the side, but again, it wasn't really my calling. And basically just to start this project from scratch, and design, this build or the winery part of the building, just hiring the people, everything that goes with it, has been so new and exciting to me, and that's probably what I'm the proudest of, because when I think about where we were 5 years ago and what we have today, and I know what the team here has accomplished, that makes me very proud.
What was the most difficult part of the project so far?
Construction. I'm not going to lie to you, and I don't want to go into details, but construction was kind of hair-pulling. Things I had no idea you could actually do as a trade. That was interesting. It took way longer than it should have, and I think lots of things could have been done differently. But I'm going to leave it like that.
Fair enough. That's all the questions that I have for you. Is there anything I didn't ask that I should have? Anything else we didn't cover that we should have covered?
No, I think I think that's all I can think of, really.
Excellent. All right. Well, thank you so much for
you,
your
Rich.
time, for your stories, and we'll go ahead and let you off the hook here.
Thank you.